The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Helmand province, as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera adjusted his scope for the third time in 10 minutes. The heat was already building, promising another scorching day in Afghanistan's unforgiving landscape. Rivera had been stationed on this overwatch position for nearly 6 hours, his eyes scanning the valley below, where his teammates were conducting a high-priority reconnaissance mission. The SEAL team had been deployed to gather intelligence on a suspected Taliban weapons cache hidden somewhere in the maze of mud brick compounds that dotted the valley floor. Intelligence reports suggested the cache contained enough explosives and ammunition to supply insurgent operations for months. The mission was critical, but the terrain made it incredibly dangerous. Rivera's position on the ridge gave him a commanding view of the entire area. He could see his 5 teammates moving carefully through the narrow alleyways between buildings, their movements coordinated and professional despite the constant threat. Through his radio, he heard the quiet chatter of the team as they methodically searched each structure. "Overwatch. This is Team Leader," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell through Rivera's earpiece. "We've located the primary target building. Moving in for closer inspection." Rivera adjusted his position slightly, keeping his rifle trained on the area around his teammates. Something felt wrong. The village was too quiet. In his 3 deployments to Afghanistan, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now every fiber of his being was screaming danger. "Copy that, Team Leader. I've got eyes on your 6. Area appears clear, but something doesn't feel right up here." The SEAL team had been operating in this region for 2 weeks, following a complex trail of intelligence that had led them to this remote valley. The weapons cache they were hunting wasn't just any ordinary stash. According to their briefing, it contained specialized IED components that had been used in recent attacks on coalition forces. Finding and destroying it could save countless lives. As Rivera watched through his scope, he noticed movement in a building approximately 800 meters to the east of his teammate's position. A brief glint of metal caught his attention, but when he focused on the spot, everything appeared normal. He made a mental note to keep watching that area. The village below had been abandoned for months, its residents fleeing when Taliban forces moved into the region. The empty buildings provided perfect cover for insurgent operations, but they also created a maze of potential hiding spots and ambush points. Every doorway, every rooftop, every pile of rubble could conceal an enemy fighter. Rivera's training had taught him patience. As a designated marksman, he understood that his job wasn't just to eliminate targets, but to be the eyes and ears for his team. His elevated position gave him perspective that his teammates on the ground couldn't have. He was their guardian angel, watching over them from above. The radio crackled again. "Overwatch, we found something." Large cache confirmed. "Beginning documentation and prep for demolition." "Roger that. Take your time down there. I've got good visibility on all approaches." But even as he spoke the words, Rivera felt his unease growing. The silence of the village was unnatural. Even in abandoned areas, there were usually signs of life. Birds, insects, small animals. Here there was nothing. The absence of sound was almost deafening. Through his scope, Rivera watched his teammates work. They moved with the precision that came from years of training and combat experience. Each man knew his role, and they worked together like a well-oiled machine. But they were also exposed, focused on their immediate task, and unable to maintain the same level of situational awareness that Rivera could provide from his perch. The weapons cache was located in the basement of what had once been the village's largest building. According to the team's reports, it was extensive. Crates of ammunition, explosives, and bomb-making materials that would take time to properly document and destroy. Time that left them vulnerable. Rivera shifted his position again, stretching muscles that had been cramped from hours of remaining motionless. His water was running low and the heat was becoming oppressive, but he maintained his focus. His teammates were counting on him. As he scanned the area once more, that same building to the east caught his attention again. This time he was certain he saw movement. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. A shape that didn't match the building's architecture. He adjusted his scope's magnification and studied the area intently. "Team Leader, I've got possible movement in building 800 meters east of your position. Can't confirm hostile, but recommend increased vigilance. Copy, Overwatch. We're about halfway through documentation. Need another 20 minutes minimum." 20 minutes felt like an eternity when every instinct was screaming danger. Rivera continued his systematic scan of the area, but his attention kept returning to that building. Whatever was in there was being careful, but not careful enough to completely avoid detection. The mission had started before dawn, with the team inserting via helicopter under cover of darkness. They had hiked through difficult terrain for hours to reach their current position, moving silently through the night to avoid detection. The success of the mission depended on stealth and speed. Get in, gather the intelligence, destroy the cache, and get out before enemy forces could respond. But now, with his teammates exposed and vulnerable, Rivera realized that stealth might no longer be an option. Someone or something was watching them from that building, and his gut told him it wasn't friendly. The question was whether he should raise the alarm now or wait for confirmation of hostile intent. The decision would soon be taken out of his hands. As Rivera watched through his scope, he saw a muzzle flash from a window in the building he had been monitoring. Then another, and another. The ambush he had sensed was about to begin, and his teammates were caught in the open with nowhere to run. The first shots shattered the morning silence like thunder. Rivera watched in horror as bullets began striking the ground around his teammates, kicking up small puffs of dust and debris. The muzzle flashes he had spotted were now continuous, and he could see at least 3 different firing positions in the building to the east. Contact, we're taking fire from the east. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio, professional despite the chaos erupting around his team. Rivera immediately swung his rifle toward the enemy positions, his training taking over despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Through his scope, he could see insurgent fighters moving between windows, their weapons blazing as they poured fire down on the exposed SEAL team. I see them, team leader. Multiple shooters in the large building. Grid reference 41S MD 1L3456780. Engaging now. The distance was challenging, but well within Rivera's capabilities. He had made shots like this countless times in training and combat. But as he settled his crosshairs on the first target, more muzzle flashes erupted from buildings throughout the village. What had seemed like an abandoned ghost town suddenly came alive with enemy fighters. The ambush had been carefully planned. The Taliban had allowed the SEAL team to penetrate deep into the village, waiting until they were committed to their mission and unable to quickly withdraw. Now, with the Americans caught in the open near the weapons cache, the insurgents revealed themselves from positions throughout the settlement. Rivera's first shot took down an insurgent who had been firing from a second-story window. The man dropped immediately, his weapon clattering to the floor. But before Rivera could engage another target, he realized the true scope of what his teammates were facing. Team leader, you've got shooters in at least 6 different buildings. This whole place is crawling with tangos. Down in the village, the SEAL team had taken cover behind a low stone wall, but their position was rapidly becoming untenable. Bullets were striking all around them, and Rivera could see that they were taking fire from multiple directions. The carefully planned extraction route they had used to enter the village was now completely blocked by enemy fire. Mitchell's voice came through the radio again, calm despite the desperate situation. Overwatch, we need you to clear our back trail. We're going to have to move west toward the creek bed, but we need those positions suppressed. Roger that. Engaging targets now. Rivera began working systematically through the enemy positions he could see. His rifle barked repeatedly as he sent precisely aimed shots downrange. Each shot was calculated, each target carefully selected for maximum impact on the enemy's ability to pin down his teammates. But for every insurgent he eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The Taliban had committed significant resources to this ambush, and they were fighting with the desperation of men who knew this might be their only chance to eliminate an entire American Special Operations team. The sound of gunfire echoed off the valley walls, creating a constant roar that made radio communication difficult. Rivera could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s, the deeper boom of RPGs, and the steady chatter of machine gun fire. His teammates were outgunned and outnumbered, caught in a carefully orchestrated kill zone. Through his scope, Rivera watched as his teammates began their fighting withdrawal toward the creek bed. They moved in textbook fashion, one pair providing covering fire while the other moved, then switching roles. But the distance they needed to cover was significant and the enemy fire was intense. Overwatch, we've got wounded. Johnson took one in the leg, but he's mobile. We need that suppressive fire maintained. Rivera's heart sank. Petty Officer First Class David Johnson was the team's communications specialist, a quiet professional who had been with the unit for 4 years. The fact that he was wounded but still moving was both good and bad news. He wouldn't have to be carried. But an injured teammate would slow their movement considerably. The sniper continued engaging targets, his rifle growing hot from the rapid fire. He had already gone through 2 magazines and his ammunition supply was beginning to run low. Each shot had to count, but the enemy seemed to have an endless supply of replacements. As he watched his teammates continue their withdrawal, Rivera noticed something that made his blood run cold. A large group of insurgent fighters was moving through the village from the north, clearly intending to cut off the SEAL team's escape route. If they succeeded, his teammates would be completely surrounded with no way out. Team leader, you've got approximately 15 tangos moving to flank you from the north. They're trying to cut you off before you reach the creek. How long until they're in position? Mitchell's voice was strained but focused. Rivera quickly calculated distances and movement rates. Maybe 3 minutes if they keep moving at current speed. 3 minutes wasn't enough time for the team to reach the relative safety of the creek bed, especially with Johnson wounded. They would be caught in the open, surrounded and outnumbered by at least 10 to 1. The situation was rapidly deteriorating from bad to hopeless, but then Rivera noticed something else through his scope. There was another building further up the hillside to the west that he hadn't paid much attention to earlier. It was partially hidden by trees and appeared to have been abandoned like the rest of the village. But now, as he watched, he caught a glimpse of movement in one of its upper windows. At first, he assumed it was another enemy position and began to swing his rifle toward it, but something made him pause. The movement had been different somehow, more controlled, more professional than the somewhat chaotic firing positions he had been engaging. As he watched, a muzzle flash erupted from the building. But instead of firing toward his teammates, the shot was aimed at the insurgent fighters moving to flank them. Rivera saw one of the Taliban fighters drop. Then another. Someone else was in the fight, and they were on the Americans' side. The mystery shooter's position was perfect for engaging the flanking force, and whoever was behind the rifle clearly knew what they were doing. The shots were precise, well-timed, and devastatingly effective. Within 30 seconds, the flanking movement had been stopped cold. Rivera keyed his radio. Team leader, you've got a friendly shooter engaging the flanking force from the west. Unknown identity, but he's definitely on our side. Can you confirm friendly? Mitchell's voice carried a note of hope for the first time since the ambush began. Rivera studied the mysterious shooter's position through his scope, trying to get a better look at who was helping them. But the building's windows were shadowed, and the distance made positive identification impossible. All he could determine was that whoever was up there was an expert marksman with professional-grade equipment and training. The tide of the battle was beginning to turn. The mysterious sniper's intervention created a brief lull in the enemy's coordinated assault. Rivera watched through his scope as the Taliban fighters who had been moving to flank his teammates suddenly found themselves under accurate fire from an unexpected direction. The insurgents' formation broke apart as they scrambled for cover, their carefully planned ambush disrupted by this new threat. Team leader, your path to the creek bed is clear for now, but move fast. Unknown shooter has broken up the flanking force, but they're regrouping. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell didn't need to be told twice. Rivera could see the SEAL team moving swiftly but carefully through the rocky terrain, supporting their wounded teammate while maintaining tactical discipline. Johnson was keeping up despite his leg wound, hobbling between pieces of cover with the determination that had made him a SEAL in the first place. The hidden sniper continued to work methodically through targets, each shot precisely placed and devastatingly effective. Rivera found himself studying the mystery shooter's technique, impressed by the professional skill on display. Whoever was in that building understood advanced marksmanship principles and had clearly seen significant combat. What puzzled Rivera most was the shooter's equipment. Through his scope, he could occasionally catch glimpses of muzzle flash and brass ejecting from the window. The weapon appeared to be a high-end precision rifle, not the typical AK-47 or Dragunov that insurgent snipers usually carried. This suggested military training and resources that didn't fit with local Taliban capabilities. Overwatch, Can you maintain fire on the eastern positions while we complete our movement? Mitchell's voice came through the radio as the team continued their fighting withdrawal. Roger that, team leader. I'll keep them busy. Rivera resumed engaging targets in the original ambush positions, working to suppress the enemy fire that was still tracking his teammates. His rifle was getting uncomfortably hot, and he was down to his last magazine of ammunition. Each shot had to count, both because of his limited supply and because his teammates' lives depended on his accuracy. The battle had been raging for nearly 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. The constant noise of gunfire echoed through the valley, punctuated by the occasional explosion of an RPG or grenade. Smoke was beginning to rise from several buildings where incendiary rounds had started small fires. As Rivera engaged another insurgent position, he noticed something that made him pause. The enemy's rate of fire was decreasing noticeably. At first he assumed they were running low on ammunition or taking casualties from his suppressive fire, but as he studied the situation more carefully, he realized something else was happening. The mysterious sniper wasn't just engaging the flanking force anymore. Rivera could see muzzle flashes coming from the hidden position at regular intervals, and each flash seemed to correspond with another Taliban fighter, disappearing from the battle. The unknown marksman was systematically working through enemy positions throughout the village. Team leader, your unknown friendly is really putting in work. Enemy fire is dropping off significantly across multiple positions. Copy that, Overwatch. We're almost to the creek bed. Johnson's holding up, but we're going to need extraction once we reach the rally point. Rivera knew that calling for extraction while still in contact with the enemy was dangerous, but they were running out of options. The helicopter would be vulnerable during pickup, and the Taliban fighters were likely calling for reinforcements. Time was not on their side. Through his scope, Rivera watched his teammates reach the relative safety of the creek bed. The rocky terrain and vegetation provided better cover than they had enjoyed during their exposed movement through the village, but they were still several kilometers from their planned extraction point, and the route would take them through potentially hostile territory. The enemy fire had indeed slackened considerably, but Rivera could see insurgent fighters repositioning throughout the village. They were adapting to the presence of the mystery sniper, moving to positions that offered better concealment. The Taliban might not be as well trained as American Special Operations Forces, but they were experienced fighters who understood battlefield dynamics. Suddenly, Rivera's radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice. The transmission was clear but carried a slight accent that he couldn't immediately place. American Sniper. This is Ghost 1. Your teammates are clear of immediate danger, but enemy reinforcements are approaching from the north. Recommend you reposition to support their extraction. Rivera was stunned. The mysterious shooter was communicating directly with him, somehow having accessed their tactical frequency. This suggested access to American communication equipment and knowledge of SEAL operational procedures that was deeply concerning from a security standpoint. Ghost 1, this is Overwatch. Identify yourself and your unit. Negative on identification, Overwatch. Focus on your mission. Enemy reinforcements will reach your position in approximately 10 minutes. Suggest you displace immediately. The voice was professional and calm, clearly belonging to someone with significant military experience, but the refusal to identify himself raised red flags. Rivera made a quick decision to inform his team leader while continuing to monitor the situation. Team leader, I've got radio contact with the unknown sniper. Call sign, Ghost 1. He's warning of enemy reinforcements approaching my position from the north, ETA 10 minutes. Can you confirm friendly status? Rivera studied the mystery sniper's position through his scope, still unable to get a clear visual on the shooter. The building's shadows and distance made positive identification impossible, but the tactical support they had received was undeniable. Unable to confirm identity, but actions have been consistently supportive. Recommend we accept assistance while maintaining security protocols. Roger that, Overwatch. Use your judgment, but stay alert. As if to emphasize the point about incoming reinforcements, Rivera began hearing the sound of vehicles approaching from the north. Through his scope, he could see dust clouds rising above the ridgeline that indicated multiple trucks moving at high speed toward their position. The Taliban was committing everything they had to this fight. They had clearly identified the Americans as high-value targets and were willing to risk significant resources to eliminate them. This suggested that the weapons cache the SEAL team had discovered was even more important than intelligence reports had indicated. Ghost 1, I confirm vehicles approaching from the north. Can you provide support if I displace to alternate position? Affirmative, Overwatch. I'll maintain Overwatch on your teammates while you reposition. Move now. Rivera quickly gathered his equipment and began moving to a backup position he had identified earlier in the mission. As he moved, he could hear the mystery sniper's rifle, continuing to fire at regular intervals, keeping pressure on the enemy positions throughout the village. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder, and Rivera estimated he had maybe 5 minutes before the reinforcements arrived at his original position. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex, with multiple moving pieces and an unknown ally whose motivations remained unclear. But one thing was certain. Without Ghost 1's intervention, his teammates would likely be dead or captured by now. Whatever the mystery sniper's identity or agenda, he had proven himself through actions when it mattered most. Rivera reached his alternate firing position just as the first enemy reinforcement vehicles crested the ridge to the north. Through his scope, he counted at least 4 pickup trucks loaded with armed fighters, along with what appeared to be a technical vehicle mounting a heavy machine gun. The Taliban had committed serious resources to this engagement. From his new position, Rivera had a different angle on the battlefield and could see details that had been hidden from his previous location. The mystery sniper's building was now partially visible, though the shooter himself remained concealed in the shadows of an upper-floor window. More importantly, Rivera could see the true scope of the enemy force they were facing. The village below wasn't just occupied by a few dozen Taliban fighters. It was a major staging area. Rivera counted at least 50 insurgents moving between buildings, with more arriving as the reinforcement vehicles disgorged their passengers. This wasn't a chance encounter or opportunistic ambush. The Taliban had been using this location as a forward operating base, and the SEAL team had walked directly into a hornet's nest. Team leader, be advised you're facing a much larger force than initially estimated. I count at least 50 tangos in the village, with more arriving. This appears to be a major enemy position. Mitchell's response was grim but unsurprised. Copy that, Overwatch. We figured as much from the volume of fire we took. The weapons cache was just the tip of the iceberg. This whole valley is a Taliban stronghold. The revelation changed the tactical picture significantly. Instead of a quick strike against an isolated weapons cache, they had stumbled into a major enemy position that likely supported insurgent operations across the entire region. The intelligence value was enormous, but so was the danger to the team. Rivera watched as the reinforcement vehicles moved into position around the village perimeter. The Taliban commanders were clearly experienced, establishing overlapping fields of fire and blocking potential escape routes. They were treating this engagement as seriously as the Americans were. Ghost 1, do you copy? Enemy reinforcements are in position and establishing a perimeter. My teammates are going to need help reaching their extraction point. The mystery sniper's voice came back immediately. Copy, Overwatch. I can see the situation developing. Your teammates need to move east along the creek bed for approximately 2 kilometers. There's a clearing suitable for helicopter landing at grid 41 SMD 15678 69234. Rivera quickly plotted the coordinates on his map. The location Ghost 1 had provided was indeed suitable for extraction, but reaching it would require the team to move through potentially hostile territory while being pursued by a much larger enemy force. Team leader, Ghost 1 is providing extraction coordinates. Grid 41 SMD 15678 69234, approximately 2 clicks east along your current route, but you're going to have company on the way. Understood, Overwatch. We're beginning movement now. Johnson's leg is getting worse, but he's still mobile. Through his scope, Rivera could see his teammates beginning their movement along the creek bed. They were maintaining good tactical discipline, using the terrain for concealment while making steady progress toward the extraction point. But the Taliban forces were also moving, with several groups of fighters beginning to pursue along parallel routes. The cat-and-mouse game that followed tested every aspect of the Americans' training and experience. Rivera and Ghost One worked in coordination, engaging enemy forces that threatened the SEAL team's movement while avoiding detection themselves. It was a deadly game of three-dimensional chess played across several square kilometers of hostile territory. Rivera found himself developing grudging respect for Ghost One's tactical abilities. The mystery sniper seemed to anticipate enemy movements and consistently positioned his fire to maximum effect. His shots were precise and well-timed, often eliminating key enemy personnel just as they posed the greatest threat to the escaping SEALs. But ammunition was becoming a critical concern for Rivera. He was down to his last few rounds and there was no resupply available. Each shot had to count, not just for tactical effectiveness but because he might not have another opportunity. Ghost One, I'm running low on ammo. Can you maintain primary overwatch while I conserve rounds for critical targets? Affirmative, Overwatch. I have sufficient ammunition and good visibility on multiple approach routes. Focus on threats I cannot engage from my position. The coordination between the two snipers was seamless, despite never having worked together before. Rivera found himself wondering about Ghost One's background and training. The level of tactical sophistication and marksmanship skill suggested special operations experience, but from which military organization? As the SEAL team continued their movement toward the extraction point, Rivera noticed something troubling through his scope. A group of Taliban fighters had gotten ahead of his teammates and was setting up what looked like an ambush position near a narrow section of the creek bed. The Americans would be forced to pass directly through the kill zone, and there was no alternate route available. Team leader, you've got approximately 8 tangos setting up an ambush about 500 meters ahead of your current position. They're in good concealment on both sides of the creek. Can you engage them from your position? Rivera studied the angles carefully. The ambush position was partially concealed by terrain features, and his current location didn't provide clear shots at all the enemy fighters. He could probably eliminate 2 or 3 of them, but the remainder would still pose a significant threat. Negative, team leader. I can only engage part of the position from here. Ghost One, can you assist with the ambush position ahead of the American team? I see them, Overwatch. But I need you to create a distraction. When I give the signal, engage the eastern edge of their position. I'll take the western side. Rivera acknowledged the plan and prepared for what would likely be his most critical shots of the engagement. His teammates' lives depended on perfect coordination between himself and a shooter he had never met and couldn't even see clearly. The seconds stretched, like hours as Rivera waited for Ghost One's signal. Through his scope, he could see his teammates approaching the ambush site, unaware of the death trap waiting ahead. Johnson was visibly struggling now, his wounded leg clearly causing significant pain. But he continued moving with the stubborn determination that defined Navy SEALs. Finally, Ghost One's voice crackled through the radio. Execute. Rivera's rifle barked twice in rapid succession, his shots perfectly placed to eliminate the Taliban fighters on the eastern side of the ambush position. Simultaneously, he heard the distinctive crack of Ghost One's weapon engaging targets on the western side. In less than 10 seconds, the ambush had been neutralized. 8 enemy fighters lay dead, their carefully planned trap turned into their own grave by the coordinated fire of 2 expert marksmen. Team leader, path is clear. Move fast, more tangos are heading your way. The SEAL team rushed through the former ambush site, giving the dead insurgents only a brief glance as they continued their race toward extraction. Time was running out and the Taliban forces were closing in from multiple directions. Rivera checked his ammunition one final time. 3 rounds remaining. Whatever happened next, he would have to make every shot count. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance brought both relief and urgency to the situation. Rivera could hear the distinctive whop-whop-whop of what sounded like a Black Hawk approaching from the southeast, right on schedule for the emergency extraction. But the Taliban forces had heard it too, and their movements became more desperate and aggressive. Team leader, I have eyes on the extraction bird, approximately 5 minutes out. But enemy forces are converging on your position from multiple directions. You're going to have a hot landing zone. Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio with typical SEAL composure. Copy that, Overwatch. We can see the clearing ahead. Johnson's hanging in there, but we're going to need suppressive fire during the pickup. Rivera surveyed the tactical situation through his scope. The clearing that Ghost One had identified was indeed suitable for helicopter landing, but it was also exposed to fire from several directions. Taliban fighters were moving to positions that would allow them to engage the helicopter during the vulnerable landing and takeoff phases. The next few minutes would be the most dangerous of the entire mission. Helicopters were sitting ducks during landing operations, and the Taliban knew it. They would throw everything they had at the extraction attempt, hoping to down the aircraft and eliminate both the SEAL team and the aircrew. Ghost 1, can you see the approaching helicopter? We're going to need coordinated suppressive fire to protect the landing zone. Affirmative, Overwatch. I count approximately 20 tangos moving to engage the extraction. I'll take targets on the western approach. You handle the eastern side. Rivera studied the enemy positions through his scope, calculating angles and distances. With only 3 rounds remaining, every shot had to achieve maximum tactical effect. He needed to eliminate the threats that posed the greatest danger to the helicopter and his teammates. The Black Hawk came in low and fast, its pilot clearly aware of the hostile environment. Rivera could see door gunners preparing their weapons as the aircraft approached the landing zone. The aircrew knew they were flying into a firefight, but they came anyway because American Special Operations Forces were in trouble. As the helicopter flared for landing, the Taliban opened fire from multiple positions. Muzzle flashes erupted throughout the area as insurgent fighters engaged the aircraft with everything from AK-47s to RPGs. The air filled with the sound of bullets striking metal and the deeper boom of rocket-propelled grenades detonating nearby. Rivera's first shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who had been preparing to fire an RPG at the helicopter. The man dropped just as he was about to pull the trigger, his rocket sailing harmlessly into the sky. Ghost 1's rifle was barking continuously, engaging targets with methodical precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. The SEAL team reached the landing zone and began loading into the helicopter while maintaining defensive fire. Rivera could see Johnson being helped aboard by his teammates, the wounded SEAL still conscious and alert despite his injuries. The door gunners were providing suppressive fire, their heavy machine guns raking enemy positions with devastating effect. But more Taliban fighters were arriving every second, and the volume of incoming fire was increasing dramatically. Rivera could see bullet holes appearing in the helicopter's fuselage, and he knew the aircraft couldn't remain on the ground much longer without sustaining critical damage. His second shot took down an insurgent who had flanked around to the south and was firing directly at the helicopter's cockpit. The range was extreme for his weapon system, but the shot was true. The Taliban fighter crumpled, his weapon falling silent. Team leader, all personnel aboard? Rivera could hear the helicopter's engine spooling up for takeoff, the pilot obviously eager to get out of the kill zone. Affirmative, Overwatch. All souls on board. Get to your extraction point. Rivera had been so focused on protecting his teammates that he had almost forgotten about his own extraction. The original plan called for him to move to a different landing zone several kilometers away, where another helicopter would pick him up once the primary extraction was complete. But as he prepared to move, Rivera realized he had a problem. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves along all the routes to his planned extraction point. Without support, he would never make it through the enemy forces that were now thoroughly alerted and actively hunting for American personnel. Ghost 1, I need to displace to alternate extraction, but my routes are compromised. Can you provide support? There was a long pause before Ghost 1 responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note that Rivera hadn't heard before, something that sounded almost like regret. Negative, Overwatch. I cannot maintain this position much longer. Enemy forces are closing on my location as well. Rivera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If Ghost 1 was compromised, he would lose the one advantage that had kept him alive through this engagement. The mystery sniper's precise fire had been the decisive factor in the mission's success, but it appeared that success might have come at a cost. Through his scope, Rivera could see Taliban fighters moving toward the building where Ghost 1 was positioned. The mystery sniper continued firing, but Rivera could tell from the sound that he was under increasing pressure. The intervals between shots were becoming longer, suggesting he was being forced to change positions frequently to avoid enemy fire. The helicopter carrying his teammates was now airborne and climbing rapidly, but it was still taking fire from the ground. Rivera used his final round to eliminate another RPG gunner who was tracking the aircraft, watching with satisfaction as the insurgent dropped just before he could launch his rocket. But now Rivera was out of ammunition and facing a dire situation. He was alone, surrounded by hostile forces with no clear route to extraction. The Taliban knew there was at least one more American sniper in the area, and they would search until they found him. Ghost 1. What's your status? The response came in short, clipped phrases that suggested Ghost 1 was actively engaged with enemy forces at close range. Under pressure. Multiple tangos in building. Will attempt to egress. Then the radio went silent. Rivera stared at Ghost 1's building through his scope, looking for any sign of movement or indication of what was happening inside. Smoke was rising from several windows, suggesting the use of grenades or incendiary devices. The Taliban appeared to be assaulting the building directly rather than trying to lay siege to it. Suddenly, Rivera saw a figure emerge from the building's rear exit. Even at distance, he could tell it was a man carrying a sniper rifle and moving with the fluid grace of a trained operator. But Taliban fighters were close behind, and more were moving to cut off his escape routes. Without ammunition, there was nothing Rivera could do to help the man who had saved his teammates' lives. He could only watch as Ghost 1 attempted to escape through the hostile terrain, outnumbered and outgunned, but still fighting. The mystery sniper made it perhaps 200 meters from the building before he was surrounded. Rivera watched through his scope as the final drama played out, knowing that he was witnessing the last moments of a warrior whose identity he might never learn. But Ghost 1 had one final surprise left. Instead of surrendering or fighting a hopeless battle, the mystery sniper made a choice that would haunt Rivera for the rest of his life. Rivera watched through his scope as Ghost 1 reached into his equipment and pulled out what appeared to be a detonator. The mystery sniper was surrounded by at least 15 Taliban fighters. But instead of raising his hands in surrender, he turned back toward the building he had just escaped from. The explosion that followed lit up the entire valley. The building where Ghost 1 had been positioned erupted in a massive fireball that sent debris flying hundreds of meters in every direction. The shockwave was so powerful that Rivera felt it even from his distant position, and the sound echoed off the surrounding mountains like thunder. In that instant, Rivera understood what had happened. Ghost 1 hadn't just been using the building as a sniper position, he had been protecting something inside it. The explosion was too large and too controlled to be accidental. The mystery sniper had deliberately destroyed whatever he had been guarding, choosing to eliminate it rather than let it fall into Taliban hands. The insurgent fighters who had been surrounding Ghost 1 were thrown to the ground by the blast, several of them clearly injured or killed by flying debris. In the chaos that followed, Rivera lost sight of the mystery sniper completely. Smoke and dust filled the air, making observation through his scope nearly impossible. But Rivera had more immediate concerns. The massive explosion had alerted every Taliban fighter in the valley to his general location. He could see insurgents moving toward his position from multiple directions, their search pattern systematic and determined. Without ammunition and with no support, his situation was becoming desperate. His radio crackled with an unexpected transmission on the emergency frequency. Any American forces, this is Rescue 11. We have a lone operator requesting immediate extraction. Transmit your location for emergency pickup. Rivera couldn't believe what he was hearing. Another helicopter was inbound, apparently responding to a distress call that he hadn't made. But there was only one person who could have made that call. Ghost 1, somehow still alive and still fighting. Rescue 11, this is Overwatch. I'm at Grid 41S MD 13246-68901, approximately 800 meters southeast of the large explosion. Multiple hostile forces converging on my position. I am out of ammunition and unable to reach planned extraction point. Copy Overwatch. We have visual on the explosion site. Be advised, we're coming in hot. Pop smoke if you have it. Rivera pulled his last smoke grenade from his equipment and prepared to mark his position. The sound of rotors was growing louder, but so was the sound of Taliban fighters moving through the rocks around his position. It was going to be a very close race. As he waited for the helicopter to arrive, Rivera caught a glimpse of movement in the smoke and debris around the destroyed building. A lone figure was moving through the chaos, still carrying a rifle and heading toward higher ground. Even at distance and through the obscuring smoke, Rivera could tell it was Ghost 1. Somehow the mystery sniper had survived the massive explosion he had triggered. The rescue helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, flying low and fast toward Rivera's position. It was a different aircraft than the one that had extracted his teammates. This one appeared to be a special operations variant with additional armor and defensive systems. Whoever Ghost One really was, he had access to some very serious resources. Rivera popped his smoke grenade and prepared for extraction. But as the helicopter approached his position, Taliban fighters opened fire from multiple locations. The aircraft took hits but continued its approach. The crew clearly determined to complete the rescue despite the hostile fire. But just as the helicopter was about to land, Rivera's radio crackled with Ghost One's voice one final time. The transmission was weak and distorted, suggesting the mystery sniper was badly injured or his equipment damaged. Overwatch. Mission complete. Cache destroyed. Get out of here. The words hit Rivera like a physical blow. The weapons cache that his team had discovered wasn't the real target. It had been a decoy. The real objective had been whatever Ghost One had been protecting in that building, and he had chosen to destroy it rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and gunfire, its crew chief gesturing frantically for Rivera to board. As he ran toward the aircraft, Rivera took one last look through the smoke, toward where he had last seen Ghost One. The mystery sniper was nowhere to be seen, vanished into the rugged terrain like a ghost. During the flight back to base, Rivera tried to piece together what had really happened in that valley. His teammates had successfully gathered intelligence on a significant Taliban weapons cache, but that had apparently been a secondary objective. The primary mission had belonged to Ghost One, and whatever he had been protecting was important enough to die for. The debriefing that followed was unlike any Rivera had ever experienced. Intelligence officers asked detailed questions about Ghost One's capabilities, equipment, and tactics, but they seemed to know more about the mystery sniper than they were willing to share. When Rivera asked about the sniper's identity and status, he was told that information was classified above his clearance level. Weeks later, Rivera learned from unofficial sources that the building Ghost One had destroyed had contained a sophisticated Taliban communications center that had been coordinating insurgent operations across 3 provinces. The facility had been fed intelligence by a high-level mole within the Afghan government, and its destruction had dealt a devastating blow to Taliban capabilities in the region. But Ghost One's fate remained a mystery. No body was ever recovered from the destruction site, and there were conflicting reports about whether anyone had been seen leaving the area after the explosion. Some intelligence analysts believed the mystery sniper had been killed in the blast, while others suggested he had somehow escaped into the mountains. The mission was classified as a complete success, with Rivera and his teammates receiving commendations for their actions under fire. But Rivera couldn't shake the feeling that they had been part of something much larger and more complex than a simple weapons cache raid. Months later, while deployed to a different region of Afghanistan, Rivera heard rumors about a lone sniper who had been providing long-range support to American forces in remote areas. The reports described an operator who appeared without warning, eliminated key targets with impossible precision, and vanished before anyone could identify him. The local fighters had given this phantom a name. They called him the Ghost of the Mountains. Rivera never knew for certain if these reports referred to the same man who had saved his team that day in the valley, but he liked to think that Ghost One was still out there somewhere, still fighting the war in his own mysterious way. The 5 bullets that had saved the SEAL team had come from a rifle fired by a man whose identity might never be known, but whose actions had changed the course of the war in ways that would never be fully understood. In the shadowy world of special operations, sometimes the most important victories were achieved by heroes who could never be acknowledged or thanked. Rivera kept Ghost One's memory alive in the only way he could, by telling the story to other operators, sharing the lessons learned from that day in the valley, when an unknown warrior had emerged from the shadows to save American lives. The mystery sniper's legacy lived on in the tactics and techniques that Rivera passed on to the next generation of special operations forces. In the end, Ghost One had achieved the ultimate goal of any special operations warrior. He had completed his mission and saved lives, even at the cost of his own anonymity and possibly his life. He had become a legend whispered in the briefing rooms and barracks of special operations units, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought by heroes whose names will never be known.